Elias had never seen a place so beautiful and so broken at the same time. Kelthara, the alien world he'd come to against his will, was a dream shattered by war. The sky was made of strange colors, a mix of teal and rose, with streaks of gold that cracked like glass under the light of two dying suns. From the city's broken streets, he could see the horizon, where the once proud spires of crystal towers now leaned sideways, cracked and scorched by orbital bombardments. The ruins of a once great civilization, brought to its knees by an enemy they couldn't defeat alone. It was beautiful in a way that made Elia's heart ache. Beautiful in the way a memory is something that could never be again. He stood on the edge of the palace's shattered courtyard, his exosuit covered in dirt and black scorch marks. The air was thin, and every breath felt like it cut through his chest. Yet he didn't mind. He had grown used to the air on Kelthara, used to the endless war that had torn through his bones, his spirit. But most of all, he was used to her. Princess Sarath, the alien princess who had somehow captured his heart amidst the chaos. When Elias had first been brought to Kelthara as part of a peace mission, he had thought of nothing but returning to Earth. He had heard the stories about the alien species, about their strength and beauty, about their arrogance. The Keltharans didn't need humans, didn't want them. They saw them as fragile, weak things. Nothing more than ants compared to their towering forms, their glowing eyes, their seemingly endless power. But from the first time he met Sarath, everything had changed. He could still remember the first time he saw her. The alien princess had been standing on the palace balcony, looking out over the ruined city. The sunlight had caught her silver hair, turning it into a cascade of shimmering stars. Her eyes, glowing with an internal light, had locked onto his the moment he entered the courtyard. "You," she had said, her voice like music, strange and yet familiar. "A human soldier of all things, what are you doing here?" At the time, Elias had been exhausted, barely able to stand. His mind had been full of thoughts of home, of Earth, and yet when her gaze met his, something inside him shifted. There was power in her eyes, yes, but there was also something else, something fragile, something lonely. "I'm here to help," he had said, though his voice had sounded small against the vastness of her world. She had raised an eyebrow. "Help? How can you help when your kind cannot even survive the climate here?" He hadn't been able to answer at first, but she hadn't walked away. Instead, she had studied him, as though trying to understand him in ways no one had ever tried before. And somewhere in that moment, Elias had realized that Sarath was unlike anyone he had ever met. She wasn't the cold princess of legend, but a woman who was just as broken as the world she ruled. And from that moment, Elias couldn't get her out of his mind. Now, standing in the middle of what had once been her family's grand palace, Elias felt a rush of emotions flood over him. The weight of everything he had seen in this alien world, the destruction, the war, the loss, all seemed to blur in front of his eyes. He remembered the first battle, the Vorn. They were an alien species, savage and relentless, made of living metal that devoured light. When they came, they didn't come for peace. They came to conquer. He had fought beside Sarath during the first wave of attacks, holding his ground as she commanded her troops, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. He remembered the way her eyes had sparkled with the fire of a warrior. She had been born to lead, to fight. Yet even as they fought side by side, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to her, something buried deep under the cold steel of her royal demeanor. And then the day had come when she looked at him in a way no one ever had before. It was a night of too much death. The Vorn had breached the outer walls of the capital, and it had been a massacre. The soldiers, both human and Keltharan, were scattered across the broken streets. And in the middle of it all, Elias had fought like he'd never fought before, his hands covered in blood, his armor cracked and burnt. Sarath had been right there, just a few feet away, slashing through enemy soldiers with a grace that could only be described as deadly elegance. She had been unstoppable, but Elias could see it, the exhaustion in her eyes, the strain in her movements. Even she wasn't invincible. When the battle ended, with the city still standing but bloodied, she had approached him, her glowing eyes tired but focused. "You fight differently than the others," she had said, her voice quieter than usual. "You fight for something, for someone." Elias hadn't been sure how to respond, but her gaze had held him, as if she were seeing straight through him. "I fight to survive," he had finally said, wiping the blood from his face. "And I fight to make sure that those I care about survive too." Sarath had said nothing for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she had taken a step closer to him, her hand brushing his arm. "I think," she had whispered, "that you may be the only one who understands what it means to protect something." That was the moment it had started, the connection, the slow, undeniable pull between them. Now, in the ruins of her palace, Elias felt that pull more than ever. He could see the devastation around them, and yet all he wanted was to protect her, to make sure she could rebuild her world and her heart. The two suns above began to set, casting long shadows across the palace courtyard. Elias stood there, his hand over his chest, feeling the beat of his heart. For the first time in a long while, he felt something other than fear. He felt hope, and he would fight for it. The days after the battle had been filled with silence, the kind of silence that settles in after a great loss, when everything around you is still, but inside, your heart is screaming. Elias sat by the edge of the palace ruins, looking out over the jagged horizon. The twin suns had set hours ago, and the city, though still standing, seemed like a dying thing, its towers of crystal now dark, their former beauty lost under the weight of war. The streets were empty, except for the occasional soldier or worker making their way through the broken paths, trying to rebuild what had been lost. But Elias wasn't thinking about the city. His mind was on the princess, Princess Sarath. She had been busy with the rebuilding efforts, overseeing the new defenses and rallying the people to keep fighting. Yet, Elias noticed something had changed. She had changed. She was quieter, more distant, as if the weight of everything, the war, the destruction, the loss of her family, was finally catching up with her. He understood. He saw the same shadows in her eyes that he felt in himself. And yet there was a strength in her that no one else had. Elias had seen it in the way she fought, in the way she commanded her troops, in the way she stood tall even when everything around her was falling apart. She wasn't like the others of her kind. She wasn't cold and distant. She was different. She was real. The first time he truly saw her, truly understood her, was a few days after the battle. The palace courtyard had been cleared, and the evening air was cool. Elias had been walking back from a training session, his body sore but his mind restless. As he passed the courtyard, he heard soft singing, a melody that seemed to dance with the wind. Curious, he had stepped forward, only to stop dead in his tracks when he saw her. Sarath was standing alone in the middle of the courtyard, her silver hair glowing softly in the moonlight, her eyes closed as she sang a song that seemed both ancient and sorrowful. The words were in her native tongue, a language Elias couldn't understand, but the emotion in her voice was clear. It was a song of loss, of longing, of something beautiful that had been lost forever. Elias didn't move. He didn't want to disturb her. He just stood there, listening to the song, feeling the raw emotion that flowed through her every note. It was a side of her he had never seen before, a side that wasn't the warrior, the leader, the princess. It was the side of her that was human, just like him. A side that had known pain and loss and the unbearable weight of responsibility. When the song ended, Sarath stood there in silence, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world was resting on her. For a moment, Elias didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if she had even seen him, but then she turned, her glowing eyes meeting his. "You shouldn't have heard that," she said softly, her voice not as strong as it usually was. "It's not meant for others." Elias took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "It was beautiful," he said, his voice low but sincere. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." Sarath looked at him for a long moment, her gaze searching his face. You didn't, she whispered. I don't know if I can keep doing this. Keep being the person everyone expects me to be. Keep carrying this weight. I'm so tired, Elias. I don't know if I can do it alone. Elias took another step closer, his heart aching for her. He didn't know the weight of being a princess, of leading a people, but he understood what it meant to be tired, to be broken, to feel like there was no way out. And in that moment, he wanted nothing more than to take that pain away from her. You don't have to do it alone, he said, his voice stronger now steady. You've got people who care about you. You've got me. You don't have to carry this burden on your own. Sarath didn't say anything for a long time. Instead, she took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. The tension in her body seemed to ease just a little. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I'd do without you. Elias felt a warmth spread through him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a connection, a bond, something deeper than friendship, but not quite love. Not yet, but he could feel it, growing between them like a spark waiting to catch fire. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. I'm here for as long as you need me. And he meant it. In the days that followed, Elias and Sarath spent more time together. They trained together, fought side by side, and talked late into the night about their homes, their worlds, and their dreams. Sarath would often ask him questions about Earth, about his people, and he would tell her stories of his planet, of the beauty of the oceans, the forests, the endless sky. And in turn, she would tell him about Kelthara, its history, its people, its struggles. She would talk about her childhood, about her family, about the legacy she was supposed to carry. But no matter how much they talked, Elias always found himself drawn to the quiet moments, the moments when they didn't need to speak, when their eyes met across the room, when their hands brushed by accident, when the air between them seemed to hum with a tension neither could ignore. It was on one of these nights that everything changed. They had been sitting together in the courtyard, the stars overhead brighter than Elias had ever seen, their light shimmering like diamonds in the deep black sky. Sarath had been silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her mind far away. Elias could tell she was troubled, lost in her thoughts. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him immediately, but when she did, there was something in her eyes, something deep and unspoken. "I don't know if I can be the leader my people need," she said quietly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Elia's heart ached for her. "You are stronger than you think," he said, his voice full of certainty. "You've been through so much and you've never given up. You are everything they need, Sarath." For a moment she just stared at him, and then, with a soft sigh, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Elias didn't respond. He didn't need to. He just wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, offering her the strength she had always given him. The connection between them deepened, not with words, but with simple, quiet understanding. And in that moment, Elias knew that no matter what came next, he would stand by her side just as he had promised. The peace on Kelthara was fragile. It always had been. The rebuilding had started slowly, with people working together to clear the ruins of the city, to piece together what was left of their lives. There was a quiet optimism in the air, a belief that things might get better, that they could rebuild what had been lost. But Elias knew better. He had seen too many wars, fought in too many battles to believe that peace ever came easily. The scars on the planet, the burned-out buildings, the shattered crystal spires were just the beginning. The real fight was coming. He could feel it in his bones. It was a few days after one of their training sessions when the alarm sounded. A deep, ominous tone that sent chills down his spine. His training had taught him to stay calm in moments like these, but the feeling of dread washed over him anyway. Sarath was beside him when the first wave of enemy ships appeared on the horizon. The Vorn, they were coming. "They're too early," Sarath said, her voice tight with fear and disbelief. The last battle had only been a few weeks ago. The Vorn had been driven back. They weren't supposed to return so soon. But return they did, and this time they came in force. The Vorn ships descended from the sky, enormous, dark shapes against the sun, like creatures made of living metal. Their sleek bodies shimmered, constantly shifting and pulsing, as if they were alive. The air vibrated with the sound of their ships entering the atmosphere, a low hum that made the hair on the back of Elia's neck stand on end. "We need to get to the palace," Sareth ordered, her voice calm but strained. "Now." Elias nodded, his hand already gripping the pulse rifle at his side. He had fought alongside Sareth enough to know that she wasn't just the princess, she was a warrior, and she would fight until the very end, no matter what. Together they ran through the streets, their feet pounding against the cracked pavement. The city, once filled with life and hope, now felt like a tomb, every corner a reminder of what had been lost. Elias could hear the sound of explosions in the distance, the first signs of the Vorn's attack, and his heart clenched. "We can't let them take this city again," he said through gritted teeth, his chest tight with fear. The thought of losing Sareth, of losing everything they had fought for, was unbearable. "We won't," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She glanced at him, her gaze lingering for a moment before turning back to the path ahead. "I won't let them destroy my people again." They reached the palace in what felt like an eternity, but when they arrived, the sight that greeted them was worse than either of them had imagined. The Vorn had already landed. A massive ship, shaped like a twisted, jagged blade, hovered above the palace, casting a long shadow over the ruined city. Smaller Vorn ships had already begun to land in the courtyard, their metal bodies shifting and expanding as they released troops into the streets. The sound of their weapons charging and their voices speaking in a strange, mechanical language filled the air. Sareth turned to Elias, her face pale but resolute. "We fight here," she said, her voice hardening. "This is where we make our stand." Elias nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. No more running, no more hiding. This was the moment they had all been preparing for. "Prepare the soldiers," Sareth called to her commanders, who had gathered nearby. "We hold the palace at all costs." The soldiers, Kael'Tharan and human alike, rallied around her, their faces set in determination. They knew what was at stake. They knew what the Vorn would do if they took the palace. The first wave of Vorn soldiers advanced, their armor gleaming under the dim light, their weapons raised. They were taller than humans, their bodies a blend of organic and metallic components, their eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. They moved with a terrifying precision, their steps synchronized as if they were one single entity rather than individuals. Elias took his position beside Sareth, his rifle aimed at the advancing enemy. His fingers trembled slightly on the trigger, but he didn't let it stop him. He couldn't. Not now. Not when Sareth was counting on him. Not when her people were counting on him. The first shots rang out, and the battle began. Elias fought like he had never fought before. Every move, every shot was driven by the need to protect Sareth, to protect this world, to protect the future they could still have if they won this battle. The Vorn were relentless, but Elias and the Kael'Tharans were just as fierce. The sound of weapons clashing, of energy blasts cutting through the air, filled the courtyard. Sareth was everywhere at once, leading her troops, directing fire, striking down enemies with a precision that took Elias' breath away. She was a force of nature, a storm of power and grace. But even the strongest storm could be overwhelmed. The Vorn began to push forward, their numbers too great, their strength too much. The walls of the palace shook with the force of their assault. Elias could hear the screams of soldiers falling, the sound of metal scraping against metal as the Vorn cut through their defenses. In the chaos, Elias lost sight of Sareth. His heart skipped a beat as panic surged through him. He pushed his way through the battlefield, shoving soldiers out of his way, his eyes scanning the smoke-filled air for any sign of her. He found her near the main entrance, surrounded by a group of Vorn soldiers. She was fighting fiercely, but they were closing in on her. "No," Elias shouted, his heart racing. Without thinking, he charged forward, his rifle raised, firing on instinct. His shots took down 2 Vorn soldiers, but there were still too many. He wasn't fast enough. He wasn't strong enough. But Sarath was. As one of the Vorn soldiers lunged at her with a massive blade, she ducked and twisted, moving with a speed that Elias couldn't keep up with. With a swift strike, she disabled the Vorn soldier, then turned and hurled herself into another enemy, taking them down with a brutal kick. Elias felt a surge of relief as she stood there, victorious, but only for a moment. The Vorn were still coming, more of them arriving every second. Their numbers were overwhelming, and the battle was far from won. Sarath turned to Elias, her eyes fierce with determination. "We need to take the fight to them," she said, her voice steady. "We fight until the last breath." Elias nodded. He didn't need any more encouragement. He would fight. He would stand with her. He would never leave her side. Together they would win. Together they would take back their home. The battle raged on. The sounds of war were deafening, explosions shaking the ground beneath Elias' feet, energy blasts slicing through the air, and the rhythmic stomp of Vorn soldiers marching toward the heart of the palace. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning metal and ozone. Elias' chest heaved with each breath, the pain of his broken body pushing through the adrenaline that fueled him. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the fight. What mattered was Sarath. He could see her through the chaos, her silver hair a beacon in the storm. She was a whirlwind, cutting through the Vorn with deadly precision, leading her soldiers with a fierce determination that left no room for doubt. Her eyes, glowing like twin stars, were fixed on the battlefield, and every movement she made was purposeful, calculated. But even Sarath, as powerful as she was, couldn't fight this battle alone. Elias' heart pounded as he sprinted through the courtyard, weaving between fallen soldiers and burning debris. He could see the Vorn forces closing in, their numbers overwhelming, their dark forms like shadows in the smoke. The palace walls, once a symbol of Kelthara's strength, were now crumbling under the weight of the attack. The spires that had once touched the sky now lay broken, scattered like glass on the ground. This was not how it was supposed to end. "We need to fall back," one of the commanders shouted, his voice strained as he fought off a Vorn soldier. "We can't hold them off much longer." But Sarath wasn't about to retreat, not while her people still had hope. "No," she said, her voice steady despite the carnage around her. She turned to Elias, her gaze locking onto his. "We fight here. We make our stand at the shattered spire." Elias' stomach twisted. The shattered spire, the heart of Kelthara's power, where the royal family had once ruled, where the soul of the planet had been stored in crystal archives. It was now a ruin, a broken symbol of everything they had lost, but it was also the last place they could make a stand. He nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Then let's make it count." They rallied their troops, moving toward the heart of the palace. The courtyard was filled with the sounds of battle, but there was an urgency in the air now, a sense of finality. This wasn't just another fight. This was the last chance to save Kelthara. The closer they got to the shattered spire, the more intense the battle became. The Vorn soldiers were everywhere, swarming like ants, their movements perfectly synchronized as if they were a single entity. The Keltharan soldiers fought bravely, but the Vorn were relentless. Elias' rifle roared to life, each shot bringing down another enemy, but it felt like a drop in the ocean. They needed more. They needed a miracle. And just when it seemed like they might be overwhelmed, Sarath made her move. She stood tall at the base of the shattered spire, her glowing eyes narrowing as she raised her hand. The ground trembled beneath them, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Elias' heart skipped a beat as he realized what she was doing. She was calling upon the ancient power of Kelthara. "I won't let them take this world," Sarath whispered, her voice carrying over the battlefield. Not while I still stand." With a fierce cry, she pressed her hand against the broken stone of the spire, and the world seemed to shift. The ground cracked open, and from the depths of the spire, a pulse of pure energy shot into the sky, lighting up the darkened air like a second sun. Elias staggered back as the power of the spire surged through the ground, a force so strong it nearly knocked him off his feet. The Vorn soldiers faltered, their movements slowing as the energy field from the spire washed over them. But Sarath wasn't done. She moved with the speed of lightning, her hand still pressed against the spire, as the energy shot outward, pushing back the Vorn and creating a barrier that cut them off from the heart of the palace. The force of the blast was so powerful that it sent a shockwave through the battlefield, knocking several Vorn soldiers to the ground. Elias watched in awe as Sarath stood at the heart of the spire, her eyes glowing brighter than ever before, her face set in a fierce expression. She was not just the princess of Kelthara, she was its protector, its soul. But even her strength had its limits. The Vorn regrouped quickly, their numbers too great, their weapons too powerful. They didn't stop. They didn't retreat. They advanced, crashing through the barrier that Sarath had created, their mechanical forms moving like a tidal wave. Elias could see the strain on Sarath's face. The power she had unleashed was costing her everything. She was burning through her energy, her life force, in a desperate attempt to protect her people. "We have to help her," one of the commanders shouted, but Elias knew it was too late. The Vorn were too close. The shattered spire was starting to crack under the strain of the battle, its once proud form now crumbling under the pressure of the Vorn's relentless assault. Without thinking, Elias grabbed a nearby plasma grenade and hurled it into the center of the Vorn forces. The explosion lit up the courtyard, taking down several Vorn soldiers in one fiery blast. The shockwave pushed him back and he stumbled, almost falling to the ground. Sarath's eyes snapped open, and for a brief moment their gazes locked. "I'm here," Elias shouted over the din of the battle. "I'm not leaving you." She gave him a brief nod, and that was all the confirmation he needed. They fought together, side by side. With every shot, every strike, they held their ground. The Vorn pushed, but Elias and Sarath refused to give up. They had no choice but to keep fighting, to hold onto hope for just a little longer. But Sarath's strength was fading. Elias could see it in the way her movements slowed, in the way her breath came in shallow gasps. The power of the spire was draining her. "No," Elias whispered, his heart breaking as he realized what was happening. "Not like this." He ran to her side, ignoring the chaos around them, his hands trembling as he reached out for her. "Sarath," he said softly, his voice filled with pain, "please, you've done enough." She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I have to finish this," she whispered, "for Kelthara, for everyone." And then, just as Elias was about to protest, the ground beneath them shook, and a blinding light erupted from the spire. The final blow had been struck. The light from the shattered spire was blinding. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, but even behind his closed lids he could feel the heat, the power of the blast, and the shockwave that sent tremors through the very ground beneath his feet. He tried to steady himself, his legs shaking from exhaustion, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but there was no time to recover. When the light finally faded and the world settled into a heavy silence, Elias opened his eyes, blinking against the residual glow. The battlefield was transformed. The Vorn soldiers who had been pushing so relentlessly just moments ago were scattered, some disintegrated by the force of the blast, others thrown back, their movements slow and disoriented. But they weren't defeated yet. Sarath was kneeling at the base of the spire, her hands still pressed against the fractured stone. Her silver hair was matted with sweat, her body trembling with the aftermath of the power she had unleashed. Her eyes, once a bright and steady light, were now dimmed, clouded with exhaustion. Elias' heart twisted. The strength that had once radiated from her was fading, replaced by a fragile weariness. She had given everything, everything she had left to save her people. He couldn't let her fall now. He rushed to her side, his boots slipping on the loose rubble as he dropped to one knee beside her. "Sarath!" His voice was hoarse, filled with desperation. Her head lifted slightly, her eyes meeting his, but the light in them was faint. "Elias," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I did it. I stopped them." "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did. You saved everyone." But as he said the words, he knew they didn't cover the weight of what had just happened. The power of the spire had taken everything from her. Her body was broken, and there was nothing left in her to give. "No," she whispered, shaking her head weakly. I don't have anything left." Her breath came in shallow gasps, and Elias felt a cold terror in his chest. He could see it now, the toll the battle had taken on her. Her skin was pale, her eyes too dim, and her pulse too faint. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not after everything they had been through together. "Sarath, please," he said, his voice shaking. He reached out, gently cradling her face in his hands. "Don't leave me, I need you." She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze softening, her lips curving into the faintest of smiles. You always have," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've never met anyone like you, Elias. You gave me strength when I had none. You made me believe that we could win. Even when everything seemed impossible, you made me feel like we had a chance." Elias' throat tightened. He swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "You made me believe, too. You made me believe in something bigger than myself, something worth fighting for, and I'll keep fighting for you, always." She didn't say anything for a long time, and Elias' heart felt like it was slowing down with each passing second. He could feel her pulse in his fingers, weak but still there. He couldn't lose her. He wouldn't. And then, just when he thought he might break, Sarath's eyes fluttered open again. This time the light in them was brighter. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Elias leaned in closer, his heart in his throat. He thought she was slipping away. But then, with a soft exhale, Sarath's hand reached out, trembling, and gripped his arm. Her strength, though fleeting, was there. "I love you," she whispered, so softly he almost didn't hear it. "I always have, I just didn't know how to say it." Elias froze, his heart skipping a beat. He had heard those words, but they didn't seem real. Not after everything they had been through, after all the pain, all the loss. She couldn't be saying this now. She couldn't be. But when she looked at him, her gaze steady and sure despite her weakness, he knew. He knew that everything that had happened, every struggle, every battle, every moment they had shared had led to this. To her. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt complete. "I love you too," he said, his voice hoarse. His eyes burned with emotion, but he didn't care. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to feel it, to understand that, no matter what, he would never leave her side. The words seemed to calm her. Her hand relaxed on his arm, and her breath slowed. The tension that had been holding her body taut finally releasing. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "I'll be here," Elias promised, his voice unwavering as he pulled her close. "I'll always be here." Sarath's eyes softened as she rested her head against his chest. "I believe you." The battle was still going on around them. The Vorn were retreating, but their presence lingered in the air. Kelthara was still fighting for survival, but in that moment, all Elias could think about was Sarath, the woman who had given him a reason to keep going, the one who had shown him the true meaning of bravery, of love, of hope. "Don't go," Elias whispered, as if his words alone could keep her alive. "I won't," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet, I'm not ready." But as she spoke, Elias felt the world around them begin to shift. The battle wasn't over, but they had won something more important. They had won each other. And though Sarath's body was frail, the light in her eyes remained. For a brief moment there was peace. They sat there in the silence that followed, the chaos of the battle muted, the world outside forgotten. In each other's arms, they found comfort in knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. And for the first time, Elias truly believed that they could survive anything, because they had each other. The battle had stopped. The battlefield, once alive with the sound of war, had quieted into a haunting stillness. The Vorn were gone, retreating or scattered, defeated by the combined might of Serath's people and the human soldiers. But the victory felt hollow. The ground was littered with bodies, some Kael'theren, some human and some Vorn, the price of war. The air smelled of smoke and burning metal, a thick, suffocating cloud that made it hard to breathe. Elias could still feel the adrenaline rushing through his veins, but it was fading now, leaving behind a crushing fatigue. And in the midst of it all, there was Serath. She was still in his arms, her head resting against his chest, her breathing slow and steady. She had survived the battle, but Elias knew the truth: she wasn't the same. The energy she had poured into the spire had drained her, and she was weak, far weaker than she had ever been before. Elias knew that this victory had come at a cost, and it was a cost he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "Serath," he whispered, his voice raw, "how are you feeling?" She didn't answer immediately. She just lay there, her hand pressed gently against his chest. Her eyes were closed, but he could feel the steady rise and fall of her breath. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, barely more than a murmur. "I'm tired," she said, "so tired." "I know," Elias replied, his hand brushing her hair back from her face. "You've given everything. You don't have to fight anymore. We've won." Serath's eyes fluttered open, her glowing irises dim but still shining with an inner light. She turned her head to look up at him, her gaze searching his face, trying to understand. "We've won, yes, but what's left?" The question hit Elias harder than he expected. It wasn't a question about the war or the fight they'd just been through. It was about something deeper, something unspoken. She was asking about their future, about what came after this, after all the bloodshed, after all the pain, after everything they had lost. He didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing. "I'm with you," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "I'm with you, Serath. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes softened, her lips curving into a faint smile. It was weak, but it was there, a smile that made Elias' heart ache. He had fought beside her. He had bled beside her. And now, more than ever, he wanted to protect her. "You don't know what you're saying," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "This world, my world, it's not yours. You're human. You'll never truly fit in here." Elias shook his head, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "You're wrong. I'm not leaving you, not for anything." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she closed her eyes again, as if thinking, processing the weight of his words. Then finally she spoke. "I've always known my duty," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I was born to lead Kelthara. I was born to protect my people. I was raised to be the ruler they needed." "I know," Elias said gently, his hand resting on hers. "But what about you, Serath? What do you need? What do you want?" For a long time she said nothing. The silence between them stretched out, and Elias could feel the tension growing, as if she were struggling to find the words. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. This time, her voice was steady, but the vulnerability in it struck Elias like a physical blow. "I want to be with you," she whispered. "I want to feel something beyond duty. I want to know what it's like to not always have to fight, to be with someone who understands me, someone who makes me feel like I don't have to be perfect." Elias' breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected those words. He hadn't expected her to say that. But in that moment, everything that had led them here, every battle, every loss, every shared glance, came rushing to the surface. "I'm not perfect either," Elias replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm here. I'll always be here. I'll fight for you. I'll fight for us." Serath looked at him for a long moment, her gaze intense. Then, with a soft sigh, she leaned up slightly, her forehead resting against his. "I never thought this would happen. I never thought I would feel like this." Elias smiled, his heart swelling with a strange mix of joy and fear. Maybe that's the point. Maybe it's not about having everything figured out. Maybe it's just about being together. Sarath's lips trembled as she nodded. Maybe. For a few moments, they just sat there, the sounds of the aftermath of the battle fading into the background. The once silent courtyard was now filled with the sounds of soldiers moving, of the injured being tended to, and of a world slowly beginning to heal. But for Elias and Sarath, the world had narrowed down to this one small space, this one moment where they didn't have to be anyone but who they were. And then something shifted. Something deep inside Elias stirred, and he knew without a doubt that he could never leave her. Not now, not ever. "Sarath," he said, his voice serious now, "I don't know what the future holds for either of us, but I do know this: I don't care what happens to this world, to Kelthara, or to me. I care about you. That's all that matters." Her eyes softened as she looked at him, her lips parting in a faint but real smile. "I care about you too, Elias, and that's all that matters to me." The weight of the words settled between them, heavy but freeing at the same time. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what the future would bring, but they had each other, and for now that was enough. Elias leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, and for a brief moment all the pain, all the loss, all the fear that had filled their lives faded into nothing. In that kiss there was no war, no enemies, no battles to fight. There was only them, only what they had, what they were building, what they would continue to build together. And for the first time in a long time, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The days after the battle were strange. The world had changed, yet it hadn't. There were no more Vorn attacking the planet, no more running for survival. But the war had taken its toll. Buildings still smoldered, the land still scarred, and the people were tired in a way that only time could heal. Kelthara was not a world of peace yet, but it was no longer on the brink of destruction. They had survived. And they would rebuild. Elias had thought that once the fighting stopped, he would feel relief, but the feeling was a quiet, aching emptiness that settled in the pit of his stomach. He had survived the battle. He had survived the war. But more than that, he had survived the fear of losing Sarath. She had saved her people. She had saved their world. But Elias knew that there was still so much weight on her shoulders, the weight of the crown she had inherited, the weight of her duty to her people, and the weight of the price she had paid to protect them. And so every day he stayed by her side, not as a soldier, not as a protector, but as something else, as someone who loved her, someone who understood the weight she carried, who would never ask her to bear it alone. They spent long hours together talking, not about war, not about battles or enemies. They spoke of their hopes, their dreams. They spoke of Earth, of blue skies and green forests, of the feel of rain on your skin, of the sound of birds singing at dawn. They spoke of Kelthara, too, of its lost beauty, of its future, of the peace they could still build. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between words, Elias would look at her, and he would see the weight in her eyes, the same weight he had seen before the battle. It was still there, lingering beneath the surface. He wanted to take it away from her. He wanted to carry it for her, but he knew he couldn't. It wasn't his burden to bear. It was hers. And that was when he realized that the true battle wasn't over. The true battle was for Sarath, for her heart, for her soul, for her peace. The sun had set on Kelthara's broken city, but it was not the dark, suffocating night Elias had grown used to. The twin suns, the ones that had once been the symbol of their destruction, now cast their warm glow over the land, their light soft and golden, as if the world was starting to heal too. It was in the early morning, just as the first rays of light touched the horizon, that Elias and Sarath stood together at the edge of the palace courtyard. The ruined city stretched out before them, the jagged remains of the once proud towers still standing like silent sentinels. The air was cool, and for a brief moment there was nothing but the gentle breeze and the soft hum of the planet's awakening. Sereth stood with her back straight, her face turned to the sky, her eyes closed. She looked at peace for the first time in a long time. Elias watched her from a few steps behind, his heart swelling with a mixture of love and fear. He had known, deep down, that this moment would come. He had known that Kelthara would need its princess again, would need her to lead, to guide them toward the future. He had known that her burden would never be fully lifted, but that it was something she would have to carry for the rest of her life. And yet, as he looked at her now, he felt something new, something stronger than fear. It was hope. Hope that, no matter how hard the road would be, they would walk it together. "You've done it, Sereth," Elias said quietly, his voice almost lost in the morning breeze. "You've saved them." Sereth's eyes opened slowly, and she turned toward him. For a moment she said nothing. Her gaze was soft, but there was a hint of something more beneath it, something that only he could see. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said finally, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "You stood by me. Even when I couldn't see the way forward, you helped me find it." Elias took a step closer, his heart beating faster. "I didn't do anything. You were the one who fought. You were the one who kept them alive. And you were the one who showed me what it meant to fight for something," she said softly, her gaze locking with his. "To fight not just for a people, but for a future where I don't have to carry the weight alone." The silence between them grew heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding, with the knowledge that, whatever came next, they would face it together. Elias reached out, taking her hand in his. The warmth of her skin sent a shock of comfort through him, and he held on to her like she was the only thing keeping him grounded in this world, in this moment. "You're not alone, Sereth," he said, his voice fierce with certainty. "You don't ever have to be alone again. I'm here. I'll always be here." Sereth's eyes searched his face, as if trying to see if he truly meant it. And when she found what she was looking for, she nodded, a small, hopeful smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I know," she whispered, "and that's all I need." The light from the two suns bathed them both in golden warmth, and for a moment everything felt right. The broken world around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, standing together, holding on to something that neither war nor time could take from them. Elias pulled her gently into his arms, wrapping her up in the safety of his embrace. And for the first time in a long time, Sereth let herself rest. She let herself feel the peace that she had fought so hard for, the peace that they had both earned. "I love you," Elias whispered, his voice full of quiet passion. "I always will." Sereth pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes filled with a light he hadn't seen before. "I love you too," she said, her voice steady but full of feeling. "And I always will." For a long moment they stood there, just holding each other. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time neither of them feared it. Together they had faced the impossible. Together they had fought and survived. And together they would build the future that Kelthara so desperately needed. As the sun rose higher, casting its golden light across the land, Elias knew that this was only the beginning. The world may have been broken, but it wasn't beyond saving. Not with Sereth by his side. Not with their love holding them together. And in that moment, under the rising suns of Kelthara, Elias believed in a future brighter than any he had ever imagined.